Okay, everybody, wrapping up on our talk about health insurance. We mentioned briefly FSAs in the previous lesson, so we want to get more into that here to figure out how they work and what we can do to analyze whether we pick the right amount. So FSAs are offered by employers, and they do require some planning because you have to choose how much you want to contribute way back at the beginning of the year, and you can't change it unless something significant happens called a life-changing event, something like marriage or a childbirth, some sort of terminal illness, something like that. So if you set a contribution amount at the beginning of the year, you have to stick to that. So this example assumes that we can contribute $29.50 to our FSA, and that the employer does not contribute anything, and there's no rollover allowed, so whatever is not used at the end of the year is just gone. We just forfeit it. So the table below gives some theoretical costs and likelihood for those medical expenses that you might incur. So you might go to the doctor for $150. You might have a prescription which costs $50. These are just average costs. You might have an x-ray, emergency room, surgery, major surgery. You might be diagnosed with cancer. All of these things then have percentages of likelihood attached to them. And so what we can do is try to figure out what the total expected value would be of each of these of any of these things happening in sum. So what I'm going to do is take the probability of each event and multiply it by the projected cost of each event. So we'll start with the 90%. It's 90% times 150. So that product there represents the primary care doctor visits. And we'll just keep on going through. If you want to pause and try this yourself and then come on back, you can do that. I'm just going to go through the rest of this. So 20% times 200 and 15% times 650, 7% times 4,000. Make sure you have that extra zero in there. 3% times 8,000. So all these larger quantities are definitely smaller probabilities, and that's because they're more major events. Okay, so all of that, put it into your calculator. What you should get is about $1,030. So that would be the average amount of medical expenses you would expect to incur in a year, given these likelihoods. So when you use an FSA, you can use pre-tax funds, which means you pay into the account before your taxes come out. So it ends up saving you on taxes. That's what basically happens here. So you are in the 24% tax bracket in this hypothetical. Your expenses were equal to the expected value. How much would you save? Well, if you hadn't taken that 1030 out and put it in your account, in your health account, it would have been taxed at 24%. So if you multiply 1030 times 0.24, you get how much tax you would have paid if you had just left it in your paycheck. And that is $247.20. Okay. Now, it's the same money because when it goes in the account, you can then pay for your medical expenses directly out of there. So it's still your money, it's just in a different place, and by diverting it, you don't have to pay tax on it. So that's the benefit there. You save yourself almost $250 in taxes there. It's a likelihood you will incur all of these expenses. Well, if you just multiply all of those probabilities, you would have to multiply, I'm not going to write this down, but you'd have to multiply 90% times 35% times 2% times 20% times 15%, just all of those together. The total would equal, this is a long decimal point, 0.0000087,318. And all you have to do to confirm that is multiply these decimals above. Those are all my percents from the chart. So there's almost zero chance that you'll incur all of those expenses. But you could possibly incur a couple of them more than once and some of them not at all. So no, very, very little likelihood that you're going to end up having to pay all of those. So if I overestimate by 300, and that 300 is just gone, what would be my net savings? So I already talked about saving 247. So that's what my savings starts at, 247.20. If I subtract off the $300 that I lose by not incurring those expenses, that money just vanishes. then what I end up with is a negative $53. So that would be my loss. So anytime that you elect less than you spend, anytime you set up the account for less than you spend, you are going to lose some money. So the question is, did you lose more than what you saved in taxes, or was it equal, or was it more? All right, page 58. So you may save on the actual expenses you incur, but anything you don't spend, it will be gone. So what is a problem with basing your FSA election on the expected value? Well, there's a couple of things here. So if you overestimate and you don't spend, you lose it. And if you underestimate, you miss out on some possible tax savings. So that's the idea behind trying to get an accurate guess. Since expected value is not always the same as actual value, it's just a prediction. It may not be a useful benchmark. So you want to sort of project best you can what kinds of medical expenses are going to come up in the next year, or what kind of medical expenses you always end up paying each year, and use those. Expected value may or may not be the best way to handle that. All right, so you decide you want to get more specific, and you want to start with a more realistic expectation. Right, so assume there's a 17% chance you're going to the doctor in any given month, and so that's 0.17. And that each month can be treated like an independent event. So if you went to the doctor in January, that does not determine or affect the chances of you going to the doctor again in March. So use complementary probability to find the likelihood you will have no visits in 6 months. All right, so the way we're going to do this, complementary means not going. So probability of a visit is 17%. Probability of no visit is 83%. Okay, all I'm doing is 1 minus 0.17 there. So if I have an 83% chance every month of avoiding the doctor, I could multiply 83% times itself 6 times, or I can just use an exponent. This right here represents 0.83 times 0.83 times 0.83 and so on for 6 months. It would have to be every month not going to have avoided it for 6 months, and so if I multiply all that together, it comes out to 0.405. So that's roughly 40.5% chance of no doctor visits over the course of 6 months. So you can see there's a decent chance of incurring costs. So you may end up having to go to the doctor. So what we're going to try to do is figure out how many different ways that there could have been 4 visit months from the total of 12 months. So this is assuming that it doesn't matter what order you go in. This is a combination. This is taking the total factorial divided by the difference, n minus r factorial times r factorial, where n is the total months, so 12 months, and r would be the 4 months that we are proposing we might go to the doctor, so 4 visit months. All right, so if I go to set this up, I'm going to have 12 factorial. On the bottom, I can do n minus r, so 12 minus 4 is 8 factorial, and then another instance of r factorial to divide out the arrangements of those 4 months. All right, and that comes out to, just put it on your calculator. Take a second to do that. And you should have 495 combinations. So there's 495 different sets of 4 months that you might go to the doctor. So what's the probability of any one of those sets occurring in 8 months resulting in no visit? So the way we want to see about this is the 4 months that you visit all have a 17% chance. Okay? The 8 months that you don't visit have an 83% chance. So if I multiply the 4 months that I do visit times the 8 months that I don't visit, regardless of what order they come in, I'm going to get the overall probability that I did go for 4 months somewhere, somehow, whether it's January, March, April, June, or whatever it may be. Okay, that product, if you put it on your calculator, comes out to 0.000188. So an extremely small chance that we end up with that scenario where there's exactly 4 months. Okay, so the probability of any of the 4 visits are independent of each other. You can just add those probabilities together. So we'll skip all this binomial distribution stuff, but the way it goes is you are going to multiply the ways that you could do those 4 months, which was 495 combinations, times with 0.17 to the fourth times 0.83 to the eighth. So of all the ways we could do it, which of those happen to be 4 months? And it comes out to about 9.3% of the time we're going to end up doing that. Okay, so if I want to calculate expected value, and this is going to wrap us up, you would need to multiply each option by the cost of the option. So 3 visits chance times 3 visits cost, and 4 visits chance times 4 visits cost, and so on. That's really hard to do. So the point of all that math is to show you really don't want to do it. It can be done, but you really don't want to do it. So since it's impractical to try to predict exactly, what you want to do is keep in mind that overestimating is worse than underestimating. So if you end up electing less than you need, all you do is lose the tax benefit. But if you end up electing more, you lose the cash. So that's where the problem comes in. When you're guessing, you're better off guessing under than guessing over. So the takeaway from this, if I could have you leave with one thing here, when you're electing an FSA, and your first job is probably going to give you the opportunity to do that. What you want to say is, which costs do I know I'm going to spend for the year? So you know you're going to go to the doctor. You know there's going to be some prescriptions. If you have been putting off a surgery, you know you're going to have a surgery, or maybe you have a follow-up MRI for a previous surgery every year. You know what some of your costs are. Add those up first. Then go and make a conservative guess at the additional expenses. But if you're not sure, try to err a little bit lower, because then you're having less money come out of your pocket if you're wrong. Whereas if you're wrong on the upper end, then all you're losing is the taxes. So, okay, so hopefully that gave you a better understanding about how these flexible spending accounts work. And we'll talk more about that if we need to as we go along. If anybody has questions about it, just write them down. I'll be happy to answer them. We can give you some real life examples of it. But it's from there. The last thing I'd like you to do, go to Google Classroom and find Exit Ticket 10.7 and complete that. You can use any notes that you have in your packet to do that.